So I'm sure that you have all had trouble remembering new words when learning foreign languages. Either you were unable to recall it, you forgot it after a while, or you simply didn't manage to make the word stick. Either way, in this video I'm gonna try to help you out by telling you 5 ways in which you can make words more memorable. These tricks are all based on ideas I developed on the video about the book Moonwalking with Einstein. For this reason, I strongly encourage you to watch that video before you move on with this one. Alright, so my first piece of advice is to pay close attention to the environment in which you first come across a new word. And what I mean by this is that you should try to remember the situation in which you learned that word in order to make it more memorable. I'm mostly talking about those situations when you learn a word in a foreign language while living in another country, that is through a real life experience. This has happened to me several times in Germany. For instance, I remember that I learned a German word for stool, Hocker, once I went to the cinema because they used it a couple of times in the movie. Or I learned the words Wirbelsäule and Verdauung once I was playing a word game with some German friends. So now whenever I think of either of these words, I think of the real life situations in which I encountered them, because in my mind both the situation and the word have become very closely connected. This is partly because I've purposely done it this way, because whenever I wrote down these words, I would also note the situation in which I had encountered them. Something else I do is to try to use the power of images more often. So humans are way better at retaining images than words or dates, because we have been hardwired this way after thousands of years of evolution. For this reason, one of the ways words can be made more memorable is by attaching an image to them when we're trying to learn them. This can certainly be done with apps such as Anki. Instead of creating flashcards just using the target word on the front and the English translation on the back, you might as well every now and then use a conspicuous image as a prompt. This way you're creating another hook with which you can associate the new word with. There's something else you can do to make that image a little bit more memorable, which is to use the power of salience. So salience describes how strongly something stands out from the environment. It is important for our purposes here because it has been shown that anything outside of the norm is more likely to stick. One of the ways in which this can be done is by choosing the most memorable picture possible whenever you are choosing an image for your flashcard. So when I find myself creating flashcards, I'll try to select the craziest picture out there for whatever reason, like the more bizarre it is, the better. So for example, for the Russian word for bite, I decided to select this image here instead of the ones that are around it, because I found it to be the funniest one. So another way you can take advantage of salience is by selecting examples for the words that you're trying to learn that are rather fun or conspicuous as well. So whenever I'm trying to learn a new word, I would usually write an example next to it. So here again, the same principle applies. That is, the more shocking that example is, the more likely it is to stick. So for example, when learning the French word écart, I use the example l'écart de l'idéologie communiste est incommensurable, which is sort of fun / original, right? So my fourth trick is to try to create multisensory experiences. So the idea here is that the more senses you involve while trying to learn something, the more memorable it will be. So one of the ways I have of applying this is by using the imagery of a song to learn the words contained in it better. So I've always been a huge fan of using music for learning foreign languages. The repetitive nature of songs and its sticky melodies will certainly make some words stick. So the way I would go about it until now was to just translate the song and then try to learn it. But after reading Moonwalking with Einstein, I thought that I could probably make the song's text a little bit stickier by, for instance, adding the power of images to the piece of music. So nowadays, virtually all the music we can listen to has an associated video clip. So if you not only listen to music in your target language, but every now and then have a look at the video clip while listening to that song, you're certainly going to be more likely, at least marginally, to retain some of the words of that song. Now that you've added an extra sense, the sense of sight, to the sense of hearing, you have more hooks to which you can associate the information of that song with. So for instance, whenever I think of the Russian word отражение, the images of the song Говори come to my mind. Or for instance, I remember the French word bourré because Stromae uses it in his song Formidable when he says "Je suis poli, courtois, et un peu fort bourré." And actually, when I think of this word, I can actually picture this guy like zigzagging, acting as if he was drunk on that tram station in Brussels. By the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you give this video a like? It would help me a lot. Thanks. Another way of creating multisensory experiences is by using flashcards that have both audio and images. I personally haven't used these types of flashcards very often, but it's certainly an option you have out there. They'll take you a bit longer to create because you have to find a piece of audio where that word is pronounced, but it will probably make the word a little bit more memorable. Finally, my fifth trick is to use elaborative encoding more often. And that is to try to relate the new piece of information to things that you already know. I do this in very limited occasions though, for instance, when I find it hard to distinguish one word from another. So for instance, the Russian words verit and gerit are not only quite similar, but they also have similar meanings because both of them are related to food preparation. For this reason, I used to have a lot of trouble whenever I wanted to say to fry or to boil in Russian. But I now solved this by associating the first sound of gerit with frying, because it sounds like as if you were frying something, like you know, and then the B of varit with boil, because they both start with the same letter, right? Another example of this is how I managed to differentiate the words прилагательное, which means adjective, from the word существительное, which means noun. So here again, both of the words are similar because they have the same ending, plus they are both related to the same field, to languages. So again, I used to have a hard time distinguishing them until I realized that существительное starts with the sounds сужест, and that can actually be associated with the word subject. And nouns are usually the subjects of sentences, right? So that's how I distinguish, that's how I know now that существительное means noun. And then the word прилагательное starts with the sounds pri, and pri in English is something that goes behind something else, like a prefix, for instance. So adjectives, which is the meaning of прилагательное, go behind nouns usually, right? So that's how I know that прилагательное means adjective. Like, I hope it makes sense. I would also use elaborative encoding every now and then when I want to learn a new word in a foreign language. For instance, I used it to learn the Portuguese word for drawer, which is gaveta. So gaveta sounds like gaviota, which is the Spanish word for seagull. So in my mind, I tried to relate the word gaveta with the word gaviota. The way I went about it was by imagining a gaviota coming out of my desk gaveta whenever I opened it. I know it sounds weird, but remember that the more conspicuous those mental images are, the better for your retention. So that was it for today. If you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed recording it, then leave it a thumbs up and share it with someone. Thanks, and see you next week or in a few days.